During the late 1800s and early 1900s, the vast majority of European immigrants who landed on American shores made their way to the impoverished communities of the Lower East Side of New York City. They resided in low-rise buildings known as tenements. Apartments were often cramped, poorly lit, and lacked proper ventilation and indoor plumbing. One Italian immigrant explained his new reality.
I came to America because I heard the streets were paved with gold. When I got here, I found out three things. First, the streets weren't paved with gold. Second, they weren't paved at all. And third, I was expected to pave them.
Having arrived in the land of opportunity, many immigrants found themselves taking low-paying jobs in garment factories. Garment workers often worked an average of 9 to 11 hours per day, 6 days per week, earning between $3 and $6 for nearly 75 hours of labor during the peak season. Factory owners provided little training, with one boasting,
I regard my people as I regard my machinery. So long as they can do my work for what I choose to pay them, I keep them, getting all I can.
Workers were required to supply their own basic materials, and it was not uncommon for them to be trailed to the restroom, denied several minutes of their lunch, searched for theft, and mocked when they complained. Injuries were common, debts were unknown, and job security was non-existent.
On November 22, 1909, members of Local 25 of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union met in New York City to support striking workers at the Triangle Waist Company. During the meeting, Clara Lemlich rose and declared in Yiddish that she wished to speak.
I have listened to all the speakers, and I have no further patience for talk. I am tired of listening to speakers who talk in generalities. What we are here for is to decide whether or not to strike. I make a motion that we go out on a general strike.
Over the next 2 days, 20,000 of the 32,000 shirtwaist workers in New York walked out. Under the slogan, "We'd rather starve quick than starve slow," the uprising of 20,000 lasted until February 1910. Although workers benefited from higher wages, improved working conditions, and shorter hours, factory owners refused to recognize the union as a legitimate organization. Furthermore, a number of factory owners, including those of the Triangle, refused to sign the agreement.
Established in August 1900, the Triangle Waist Company was one of nearly 11,000 garment factories operating in New York City. The shop was owned by Max Blank and Isaac Harris, who themselves had immigrated from Russia during the 1890s. In 1902, Blank and Harris moved their shop to the 9th floor of the new Ash Building, occupying a space of just over 9,000 square feet. Taking advantage of new technology, the owners were able to sell their shirtwaists for $3 apiece. By 1908, having expanded their operation to both the 8th and 10th floors at the Ash Building, and with sales having reached 1 million, Blank and Harris have become known as the Shirtwaist Kings.
In order to maintain high profits, Blank and Harris took several steps to ensure that the company produced the cheapest shirtwaists in the largest quantity. Beyond the long hours in exchange for little pay, the owners kept a strict accounting of their supplies. Meanwhile, Blank ordered the secondary exit door locked during working hours, a violation of New York City's labor code. When dissatisfaction among workers reached a breaking point and they walked off the assembly line, Blank and Harris hired private policemen and thugs to break the strike.
Saturday, March 25, 1911, resembled most of the workdays at the Triangle. More than 1,000 blouses had been made during the 7th hour, and everyone was hurrying to push a few more garments through the assembly line. At 4:45 in the afternoon, Anna Gulo rang the bell, the signal to cut the power and silence the machines. Workers on the 8th floor began making their way down the aisles between the sewing machine tables, talking and laughing as they headed towards the dressing rooms containing their belongings. And then a single word seemed to pierce the factory floor: fire. It was Isidore Abramowitz who first noticed a flame smoldering in his scrap bin. Although Abramowitz seized one of the 3 red fire pails from a nearby ledge, the water did little to extinguish the fire that had now grown aggressively in the span of just a few seconds. Many of the approximately 180 people working on the 8th floor that day panicked and began rushing the stairways that would lead them to safety down below. Elevator operators Joseph Zito and Gaspar Martiallo heard breaking glass and horrifying screams and scrambled to rescue as many workers as they could. Meanwhile, Dinah Lipschitz, one of the company's bookkeepers, worked frantically to alert the executive offices on the 10th floor. But there was no audible alarm, and no direct means on contacting workers on the 9th floor.
Within minutes, the blaze had blocked the stairs leading down to Green Street. With the door to the Washington Place exit locked, workers had no choice but to flee to the roof. 2 minutes later, the Green Street exit had been completely unusable. Terrified employees raced towards the building's lone exterior fire escape, throwing open the windows and crawling out onto a narrow balcony. Poorly constructed and only loosely anchored to the building, The fire escape soon twisted and collapsed, sending nearly 20 victims to their deaths 100 feet below. Workers on the 9th floor pried open the elevator doors and leapt into the empty shaft. Zito described the horrible scene.
The screams from above were getting worse. I looked up and saw the whole shaft getting red with fire. It was horrible. They kept coming down from the flaming floors above. Some of their clothing was burning as they fell. I could see streaks of fire coming down like flaming rockets.
Fire companies reached the triangle by 4:47 and discovered that their ladders were only long enough to reach the 6th floor. At 4:50, with no other avenues of escape, the first workers began jumping from windows above Washington Place. Lewis Waldman heard the alarm and joined the crowds gathering at the base of the Ash building.
Occasionally, a girl who had hesitated too long was licked by pursuing flames, and screaming with clothing and hair ablaze, plunged like a living torch to the street. Fire nets held by the firemen were torn by the impact of the falling bodies.
William Gunn Shepard, a local reporter, said,
I learned a new sound, a more horrible sound than description can picture. It was the thud of a speeding living body on a stone sidewalk. The fire at the Triangle Waste Company lasted 18 minutes. 146 people, 123 women, and 23 men had either perished or would perish in the days ahead from their injuries.
All of New York City grieved in the days and weeks following the fire at the Triangle. Bodies of the victims were taken to nearby charities' pier for identification. Memorial services were held in churches and synagogues to remember those who had perished. On April 5, 1911, nearly 120,000 New Yorkers attended a funeral procession through the streets of Manhattan and Brooklyn. The heavy drizzle that fell that gloomy morning reflected the anguish of those in mourning. The heartache over the deaths of the Triangle quickly evolved into a seething anger towards both Blank and Harris, who had themselves escaped the flames by scrambling over to nearby rooftops. The deplorable working conditions at the factory, and the owner's refusal to make improvements, were well known throughout the city. Newspapers published cartoons that highlighted both the greed of textile factory owners and the plight of those who worked in those factories. Skeletal inspectors who insisted that the Ash building was fireproof, women being burned alive as they reached for the locked door.
On April 11, 1911, both Blank and Harris were indicted on 7 counts of manslaughter for their role in the Triangle Fire. The trial itself focused on the locked door that led to a second flight of stairs, according to the prosecutor, represented a violation of the labor code and directly resulted in the deaths of 146 people. On December 27th, after listening to testimony from more than 100 witnesses and deliberating for less than 2 hours, juries returned verdictions of not guilty for both Blank and Harris.
In the wake of the Triangle Fire, state officials in New York created the Factory Investigating Commission to examine working conditions, fire hazards, wages, building sanitation, and the use of child labor in a wide range of industries. Between 1911 and 1912, the Commission held 59 public hearings, heard testimony from 473 witnesses, and investigated 3,385 workplaces. Based on recommendations, the New York State Legislature eventually adopted 36 laws designed to improve workplace safety, including automatic sprinkler systems, fire alarms, and exit doors that open outward. The Commission's efforts also inspired passage of the 54-hour bill, limiting regular hours and overtime. Ultimately, the Commission's work became a model for both other states and the federal government.
Despite the enormous improvements that have been made in terms of workplace safety, wages, hours, and collective bargaining rights, it would be a mistake to imagine that the appalling working conditions common to factories during the late 19th and early 20th centuries have entirely disappeared. While the creation of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration has done much to maintain safe and healthful conditions for workers in the United States, workers in other countries are often denied such protections. In May 1993, a fire at the Cater Toy factory in Thailand resulted in the death of 188 people. An investigation revealed that the factory was poorly designed and built, fire exits detailed in building plans did not exist, and external doors were locked. In November 2012, a fire at the Tazreen fashion factory in Dhaka, Bangladesh killed 117 people. In the end, perhaps the real tragedy related to the fire at the Triangle Waste Company is not so much the loss of 146 people, but rather that the deplorable conditions that result in those deaths are still found in factories and workplaces around the world.